Hey guys, I'm back, and in today's video, I want to talk about how to create the best Ben 10 video game, because you guys all asked me to in the latest poll I put up on my channel. Now, just to be clear here, while I do know that there are already a ton of Ben 10 games out there, I'm going to kind of avoid talking about them, since 1, it's been a long time since I've replayed any of the old Ben 10 games, and 2, I really want my ideas for a video game to be a lot more unique and out there than what we've already seen before. Hopefully this makes my video game idea sound a lot more interesting and appealing to you guys, as I spent a decent time working out these 3 ideas and how to make them very unique. So with all that out of the way, let's dive into my first idea for a Ben 10 video game, a linear, story-based Ben 10 game.
Oh, the new Sumo Slammer video game's in there!
Personally, I find myself missing the good old days of more linear, story-based video games. Sure, we still get our Uncharted's and our God of Wars, but for the most part, I don't think it's a stretch to say that linear video games aren't really as popular as they used to be, and have mostly died out in favor of more open-world video games, like GTA 5 or Insomniac's Spider-Man. I think a linear Ben 10 game could really reinvigorate this genre, and showcase the strengths of linear video games as a whole. But what exactly would this linear Ben 10 game be about, and how would it work? Well, after giving it some thought, I think I've come up with the perfect answer to that question. This linear Ben 10 game story will revolve around the -10.
Behold, the -10.
The main story of this game will be similar to the original -10 story from the classic series, because similar to that episode, Driscoll is just using the -10 as a means to an end to uncover a powerful mystical artifact that he can use to take over the world. Now as for the -10, I've come up with the idea for each of them to have their own unique level, where they battle against one of Ben's unique aliens. For example, Charmcaster will be involved in a chase sequence level, where she's trying to run away from you, and occasionally summons her rock monsters in order to attack civilians, so that she can distract you and get away from you. As Accelerate, you'll have to quickly defeat these rock monsters and keep pace with her before she gets too far away. Then when you finally catch up to her, a boss fight will ensue, where she summons hordes of rock monsters in order to attack you, and stands in the center while shooting off blasts at you. As Accelerate, you'll have to dodge around these blasts and defeat the rock monsters, and then get close enough to Charmcaster to damage her. The rest of the -10 will have similar levels, although obviously they won't all be chase sequences. For example, Animo's level will see the player as Forearms fighting off a bunch of his crazed mutations, and then as the final boss, Animo will summon his strongest monster in order to fight you. This level will play out almost as a level from a fighting game, with the player having to use multiple combo attacks they've learned throughout the level in order to defeat Animo's final boss monster. Upgrade will go against Rojo in a stealth level, where as Upgrade, you'll need to hide inside machines and wait for Rojo to walk by you, and then you'll perform a stealth attack where you fully take over Rojo's body and damage her, much like how Ben first defeated her in her first appearance. However, much like Mr. Freeze from Arkham City, Rojo will begin to adapt to your tactics, and slowly begin destroying any machinery you could hide in, which will slowly make her boss fight increasingly more difficult, till a point where there's only one way to attack her. For Diamond Head, I'm picturing a combat system straight out of Dark Souls. I'm planning to do this by allowing the player to choose between 3 possible attack options. One of these options is something I like to call the sword arm, where you can transform one or both of Diamond Head's arms into a sword and swing at your opponents, causing damage to them. The other option is the shield option, which will block laser fire and stagger any opponents that try to hit you with melee attacks. You can also throw the shield Captain America style, and it will come back to you and attach itself to your arm. Your final attack option will be throwing projectiles at your opponents, which will stagger them and cause them damage over time. You'll mostly start off fighting Forever Knight goons, so it'll be pretty easy to use whatever attack option you like and just spam it. However, once you get to the final boss, that's where things will really get tricky. The final boss of this level will be Thumbskull, and he won't be staggered by any of your attacks. You'll have to dodge out of his way as he charges at you, and then quickly hit him for damage when he sticks himself into a wall, using whichever attack option you've chosen. You can also mix the attack options together, which will help make this boss fight a lot easier. Heat Blast level, meanwhile, will play play out more like a level from Infamous. Or for those of you that aren't familiar with Infamous, basically Heat Blast level will play out like a third-person shooter. The final boss for this level will be Clancy, the bug guy, who will send swarms of bugs after you. However, Clancy will fly out of the way if you try shooting fireballs at him, so you'll be forced to use environmental takedowns. Basically, you'll lure him next to something flammable, then throw fire at that thing, causing a huge explosion that will damage Clancy. Wild Mutt's level will basically be trying to solve a murder mystery by using his detective vision / Wild Mutt vision in order to find clues scattered around the map. His final boss fight will be against Acid Breath, who will try and stealth attack you. However, thanks to Wild Mutt's keen senses, you'll be able to dodge out of the way of those attacks, and then counterattack him for damage. Stingfly's level will see him dodging out of the way of Forever Night attack planes, and using his goop to mess up their windshields and cause the drivers to crash into nearby buildings. His final boss will be Frightwig, who will grab Stingfly out of the air and toss him to the ground for damage if he gets too close. In order to defeat Frightwig, you'll need to stick up her hair, and then grab her and toss her up into the air where she'll go splat on the ground for damage. Now, for Grey Matter, I haven't really been able to come up with a unique idea for him, so I'm probably just gonna repeat the stealth level idea for him. Except this stealth level will have some horror elements, as he'll be going up against Subliminal, who will be controlling everyone in the vicinity around him. So basically, you as the player will be this tiny, insignificant speck, fighting against dozens and dozens of way taller and way more powerful creatures. Once you finally get past all of them, you'll be forced to fight Subliminal himself. The only way to defeat Subliminal is to use the mirrors and speakers around him in order to bounce off his mind control powers onto himself, which will put him in a trance, and thus he will be defeated. Now, for the Forever King himself, you'll be able to access all 10 of your transformations. We can explain this away by the artifact interfering with the Omnitrix somehow, and triggering the Master Control sequence to be activated, or just say that Ben remembered the Master Control sequence after all this time and re-inputted it into the Omnitrix. Whatever explanation we go with, it will allow the player to use all 10 aliens, and switch between them on the go. Naturally, Driscoll will be super powerful, and won't be damaged at all by the player's attacks. You'll have to wait for him to use up the energy of the artifact, and then go in and try and damage him. For aliens like Upgrade and Grey Matter, there'll be some environmental tools you can use to damage Driscoll as well. And that was the linear story game idea. But for those of you who really dislike linear story games, don't worry. I think this next idea will be more to your liking. Let's start talking about the open world Ben 10 game idea I have.
The fate of the entire universe is at stake. The Sumo Slammers universe, that is!
For this open world Ben 10 game, I was planning on setting it during Ben 10 Omniverse, but once again we could also try setting it in its own separate continuity / universe, and have little items scattered throughout the world that retell the history of this separate continuity. Kinda like how Insomniac Spider-Man has Peter's old backpack scattered throughout the map, retelling some of the events of that universe's history. And speaking of Insomniac Spider-Man, much like how in that game, the main appeal of it is traversing the world as Spider-Man, this open world Ben 10's game main appeal will be traversing around Bellwood using one of Ben's 10 aliens. Each one of these aliens would have a unique way of traversing the world that makes them all unique and special. For example, Wildvine would play very similar to Insomniac Spider-Man does in his video game, where he swings around the city, except instead of using webs, Wildvine would use his tendrils, which would snap onto buildings and allow you to swing across them. But unlike Insomniac Spider-Man, Ben will also have other means of traversing the world, like say Forearms, who will play very similarly to Hulk from Hulk Ultimate Destruction, where he's able to leap super far distances and slam down on the ground, creating massive craters and causing destruction to the nearby cars or even possibly civilians around him. For aliens like Jetray and Astrodactyl, I was picturing a gameplay mechanic where they could go super fast in the air but not be able to move as quickly around, sorta like how Spider-Man had that freefall mechanic in Spider-Man Edge of Time and Shattered Dimensions. And if all that isn't enough for you, I also plan on having the player be able to switch between aliens as they traverse the open world. So you could go from soaring through the air as Jetray as fast as you possibly can, to barreling down towards the ground as Forearms, causing massive destruction, then switch to an alien like Wildvine and start swinging through the air by attaching your tendrils onto the buildings nearby. I think this would be the perfect way to make traversal seem really appealing, by allowing you to switch between numerous other traversal methods on the fly that all manage to sync up with each other and get you closer to your objective. But what exactly is the main objective of this game, and how will we be able to find it in this big, sprawling, open-world city? Well, my dear viewer, that brings me to the next subject for discussion in this open-world Ben 10 segment: quests and quest markers.
This GPS system is linked to the Plumber Satellite database. It should find us the nearest Mr. Smoothies.
Now, before we talk about the quests themselves, let's talk about quest markers. I know a lot of open world gamers really don't like quest markers because they feel like it takes away from immersion by forcing the player to follow the waypoint instead of trying to memorize the landscape of the world themselves. However, for this game, I feel like waypoints are going to be a kind of necessity because from what we've seen of Bellwood in the TV show, it's mostly kind of the same looking and doesn't seem to have a lot of distinct landmarks. So if we're recreating it for this game, it's going to be kind of hard for the player to pick out specific locations they need to go to. So sadly, I think waypoint / quest markers are going to be a kind of necessity in this game. However, for those of you that really don't like the idea, don't worry. I plan to have Undertown be a playable segment in this game, and in Undertown there wouldn't be any waypoints because the plumbers don't often go down there and don't quite understand the landscape. So you'd be forced to memorize the locations of Undertown in order to properly navigate it. And obviously, in order to do this, each location in Undertown will be very distinct looking, and Undertown itself will be separated into zones, some that are far less crime driven and some that are far more crime driven. I'm also planning on adding certain alien transformations that can help guide you throughout Undertown. For example, Grey Matter, using his enhanced intelligence, would easily be able to map out a path throughout Undertown. This would be represented in-game by a kind of detective vision-esque mechanic that would highlight the correct route to go down if you want to get to your objective. But now that we've spent an exhausting amount of time on quest markers, let's talk about the actual quests themselves, shall we? Let's start with the main quest. The main quest line is going to be very similar to that of Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind, in that it will force you to take on more side quests and side objectives in order to progress throughout the main storyline. I'm doing this for two main reasons. The first reason is due to my own personal dislike in how a lot of open world games go about telling their stories. Take Skyrim for instance. Skyrim is a game all about exploring this vast open landscape, yet if you only play the main storyline, you're probably only going to visit like a max of 6 locations, which literally goes against the whole point of the game. And the second reason why I'm designing the game like this is because I'm planning to have the main villain of the story be someone who's slowly rising to power within Undertown, but doing so in a way that isn't so open and flamboyant as, say, someone like Siphon. In fact, the only two things that we'll know about this villain is his name and the mask that covers his face. He'll have dozens of goons that have similar masks, causing the plumbers to wonder if this guy is even real or is just some urban legend that a bunch of people have started mimicking. So because of this, every time you stop a gang, Grandpa Max is pretty much like, okay Ben, we don't really know too much about these guys, so go try to stop some other crimes while we investigate more. As for our main villain himself, he'll slowly be gaining more and more power, and eventually his troops will start reaching the surface and start attacking average, ordinary civilians in an attempt to take over the town. Naturally, you, the player, would be forced to stop this, and you would come head to head with this brand new villain and face him in a final boss. That about wraps it up for the main storyline. Now as for side quests, since I planned on placing this during Ben 10 Omniverse's timeline, I was thinking of having Ben receive missions from the other plumbers, like say Blukish and Dreba, who would send Ben out on quests to locate certain items to help them in the lab. And eventually these side quests would culminate in potential upgrades for your Omnitrix, like say for example, re-unlocking ultimate transformations, or maybe even getting some Omni Kicks armor from the reboot continuity in this game. I was also planning on you receiving some stealth missions from Magister Patelade. Beating these could either give you straight up maps to Undertown, or maybe items that could help you unlock more aliens within the Omnitrix. Rook would also have some side missions for you, which would help teach you about Ravana Kai, which would give you new moves to use in combat with your aliens. For example, Forearms would learn something like say the Ravana Kai Slam, which would allow him to wrap all 4 of his arms around an opponent, jump into the air, and then throw that opponent to the ground for massive damage. But now that we've finally finished up talking about this open world game, I have one other Ben 10 game idea I want to throw at you guys. And this is my personal favorite game idea on this list, so I hope you guys enjoy it just as much as I do. With that out of the way, let's talk about a Ben 10 RPG game.
We're going to make you the star of your own video game.
Oh, man!
For those of you that have never heard or played an RPG game, I'll give you the basic rundown on what it's about. RPG stands for role-playing game, and is a game genre that focuses on allowing the player to create their own custom character, and choose how that custom character's story will play out. I think an RPG game is the perfect kind of Ben 10 game, because it allows every single Ben 10 fan to fulfill their childhood dream of receiving their very own Omnitrix. And yes, you did hear me right, you're going to be playing out your own adventure. Your character isn't just going to be another version of Ben, your character can be whoever you want them to be. Obviously, this means this game has to be set in its own separate continuity. Otherwise, we'd be risking interfering with the show's continuity and contradicting it. However, I think that just makes this all the more exciting. A brand new Ben 10 continuity that we can play through on our own. The possibilities are endless. And speaking of possibilities, I've come up with 3 possible skills that the player can invest in early on in order to cater their character to the role they want them to play. These 3 attributes are magic, intelligence, and speech. Magic is basically going to be like strength, perception, and endurance from the Fallout games, all rolled together into one. Magic users will inherently start off stronger and be able to both deal more damage as well as receive more damage due to using their spells. Along with this, they'll be more perceptive to things, like say for instance whether or not they're walking into a trap by being able to detect mana around them. I know, I'm stretching the way mana is used in the show, but in this case I kind of have to. Characters who specialize in intelligence will be able to slowly unlock the secrets of the Omnitrix and unlock functions like DNA lock. And on top of that, if you get that intelligence skill high enough, you'll be able to create upgrades for your Omnitrix, like the Omnikix armor or the Bi-Omnitrix. But these 2 options pale in comparison to the power that speech gives you. You see, speech gives you the power to control the most powerful alien in the game. That's right, folks. We're finally going to talk about Alien X.
Alien X!
I've avoided talking about Alien X up till this point because, as I'm sure you can imagine, it's incredibly difficult to balance an alien that can literally do anything. However, I think an RPG game would have the best chance of balancing Alien X. You see, much like how in Fallout 1 you need to choose the right dialogue option in order to talk down the master from his master plan, so too will you need to choose the right dialogue option in order to convince both Bellicus and Serena to do exactly what you want. And you can use speech outside of Bellicus and Serena in order to convince certain characters to help you out. And speaking of convincing them to help you, we do need to briefly go over factions. See, in this Ben 10 RPG game, you don't just have to side with the good guys like Rook, Grandpa Max, and Kevin. You can also side with the villains, if you so choose. However, you won't be able to convince every villain with just speech. Albedo, for example, will gravitate towards a character who has a high intelligence, because he'll believe that you can help cure him of his condition. Meanwhile, someone like Vilgax doesn't care how smart you are, he needs a useful ally who has powerful weaponry to help him take over the universe, which means you'll have to be fairly proficient at using the Omnitrix, or at using magic, in order to persuade him. Each faction will have its own unique questline, and have its own unique ending for the story. I think that's a good enough place to wrap up the video. I hope you guys enjoyed the video because this was probably one of my favorite videos to make, and if you did, please make sure to subscribe or leave a comment or just like the video as it really helps me out. See you guys in the next video, which will definitely be shorter than this one, I promise.